Me and my family lived near the Appalachian mountain range in Virginia. My father, a rugged outdoorsman, always found solace in nature. While I didn't share his enthusiasm for camping and such, he surprised me one day by taking me on a camping trip. At the time, he was in his mid-40s, a well-built man standing at around 6'2" to 6'3", with his regular weightlifting regimen and upbringing on a farm. The great outdoors was practically in his DE. I had accompanied him on hunting trips before, so I was no stranger to navigating the woods. This particular outing was supposed to be a hunting trip during the day, followed by a night of camping. After spending about 2 hours hiking to our chosen spot, setting up camp and hunting, exhaustion started creeping in. It was time to fall asleep. As was his custom, my dad began whistling himself to sleep, a habit that oddly helped me drift off as well. Just as slumber started to claim me, a peculiar sound jolted me awake. My father was still awake, so I turned to him and inquired about the noise. With his extensive experience in the great outdoors, he could identify any animal by its call. He informed me that it was a coyote. Relieved by his explanation, I managed to doze off again. However, my peaceful slumber was abruptly interrupted when my father shook me awake, his face etched with panic. Urgently, he insisted that we needed to leave immediately. I was bewildered until I heard it, the blood-curdling scream piercing the night from somewhere beyond the trees. Concealed from our sight, intrigued, I asked my father if we should assist whoever was making such distressing sounds. His response was to ignore my question entirely. Desperate for answers, I bombarded him with inquiries about the source of the screams, until he finally turned to me and whispered in my 45 years on this earth, "I've never heard that noise before." His words sent a shiver down my spine, because if anyone could recognize animal sounds, it was him. We swiftly packed up our belongings, and as we prepared to dismantle the tent, we heard the scream again. But this time it was much closer. I glanced towards the tree line and caught sight of a towering figure, standing between 6'9" and 6 feet and 6'7", fixating its gaze upon us. My father must have seen it too, as he tightly grasped my arm and urged me to flee. Fear held me in its grip, rendering me momentarily motionless, but I managed to snap out of it. Seizing my bag, I followed my father's lead as we raced back towards the car, which lay 5 miles away. During the first mile, the haunting screams persisted, growing louder and drawing nearer with each passing step. It matched our pace, whether we sped up or slowed down. Around the 3-mile mark, I heard a scream that differed from the rest. It reverberated through the air with greater urgency and intensity. Recognizing the change, my father began to jog. Struggling to keep up, I pushed my limits. But my dad, in peak physical condition, outpaced me effortlessly. Finally, with 1 mile left to go, my father stopped to catch his breath, but I had depleted my energy reserves and doubted my ability to continue. Just as I entertained thoughts of surrender, a deafening scream erupted from a mere 10 feet away, leaving my ears ringing. This jolt of terror renewed my resolve, propelling me into a sprint towards the car. The taillights flickered in the distance, a beacon of hope. My father had overtaken me and swiftly opened the passenger door as I leaped inside. Without a moment's hesitation, he accelerated away from the nightmare we had encountered. As I caught my breath in the safety of the car, a final earth-shattering scream assaulted my ears, leaving them ringing even within the confines of the vehicle. My father didn't spare a glance backward. He simply pressed harder on the gas pedal. Eventually, we arrived back home, the secret of our harrowing experience locked away, never to be shared with our family. From time to time, I still question my father about that night and what could have caused those bone-chilling screams. To this day, his response remains the same. He doesn't know. When I finally made it home after a week, it took 3 showers to return to normal. As I laid in my bed that night, my room lit only by my laptop, I vowed to never return to Hunting Park. When the man sent his address a week prior, I double-checked it 3 times. Not only was Hunting Park a dangerous neighborhood, but he lived in one of the most disturbing sections of it. A devilish pocket of drugged-up zombies, muggings, and burned-out homes. Fortunately, or maybe unfortunately, the pay was too good to pass up. $1,000 for 15 minutes, or as long as it took me to eat a plate of food. I walked up to the man's door and knocked 4 times, as instructed. As I waited, I looked around at the daywalkers. One woman was face down in a pile of trash bags. Another guy was taking a shit next to a fire hydrant. Suddenly, I smelled something horrible. I looked to my left. I caught a glimpse of her hair in the bushes. It was an older woman, probably in her 50s. Her shirt was tattered, hanging off her shoulders to barely cover her body. As she turned to look up at me, I noticed the dirt caked on her face. She had one eye closed, the other open. "Please," she mumbled. I knocked on the door again, harder this time. She tried standing up, but fell face first into the bush. Where am I?" she asked. I knocked again. I don't know what scared me so much about the woman. I'd seen strung out people before, but she felt different, like someone was attacking her from the inside. "Hello," I yelled into the door. "I'm here. I have a son," she whispered. "Please, it's..." "What year is it? It was only once. I don't understand." "It was just..." I heard the doorknob twist. I pushed forward, knocking into the man. "Oh," he said, stepping back. "Hello. Sorry, I said. "That woman just..." "You're quite skinny," the man said, inspecting me. "Is she okay?" I asked, catching my breath. The man peered outside, then closed the door. "Oh, don't mind them," he said. "Our country has some problems, doesn't it?" She just seemed... "I don't know," I said, catching my breath. "I'm Andy, by the way, from Craigslist." I put out my hand, but he just stared at it. Although he seemed confused by the standard professionalism. He was dressed like a banker. Dark blue blazer, beige pants, a white button-down with a blue collar, the kind of shirt finance bros wear. Yet other parts of him felt childish, like his smile, crooked and forced, like a boy on picture day. His body odor was also jarring, somewhere between spoiled meat and dish soap. "I hope you have an appetite," he said, slipping his hand on my back. "Well, I skipped lunch, like you asked," I said. "Oh, good. Good," he said. "And please make yourself at home." The apartment was surprisingly clean. Or maybe it was just empty. I couldn't tell. It looked like he had only lived there for a few days. In the center of the main room was a small table with white linen draped over it. There was a chair, some candles, and a metal food dome with utensils placed alongside it. "It's real silver," he said, pointing to the table. "I'm not a flashy person, but I do see the value in having silver. Sometimes, a meal is an occasion." I walked over to the setup, laying my coat on the back of the chair. The man didn't approach as I got situated. He stood a good distance back, watching me. In the emails we exchanged, he had specific instructions. Once I started the meal, I had to finish it as quickly as possible. Then, I needed to leave. "Sit, please," the man said. I took a seat, as instructed, and looked down at the covered dish. I could feel a knot form in my stomach. "This isn't poisoned, right?" I asked. The man shook his head. No, he said. "How could I be sure?" The man looked at me for a second, clearly frustrated. "You agreed," he said. "I know, but..." The man huffed like a spoiled child. Okay, I asked. "I'll double it," he said. $2,000. "Take it, or I'll go down the list of responders and pick the next one." I paused for a moment. Then I imagined the money. I pictured it fanned out in my hands. How nice it would feel to cover 3 months of rent for a single, potentially poisoned meal. Plus, dying by poison was still better than getting fucked by my usual shame. Ridden men. "Okay," I said. The man giggled. The sound made me nauseous. "Perfect," he said, reaching down to lift off the dome. On the plate was what looked like A pork chop with a side of applesauce. I leaned forward and smelled it. It smelled like a pork chop and applesauce. So I just eat it, I asked. Yes, the man said, taking a small step back. Just eat it. I picked up the fork and knife and cut into it. I stabbed a sliver of pork and inspected it. It had a pale color to it, the meat dripping with juice. It looked like a normal pork chop. Here goes nothing, I said. I took a bite and studied the flavor. It was a little smoky and a little sweet. Take a bite with the applesauce, the man said, pointing at my plate. I scooped up applesauce, lathered it on my next hunk, and took a bite. It wasn't too sweet, potentially homemade. The flavors grew on me as I took another bite, and then another. The smokiness of the meat mixed perfectly with the tartness of the applesauce. This was, maybe, the most delicious thing I'd ever consumed. I hadn't had a home-cooked meal in months. The more I ate, the more the man groaned in pleasure. He rubbed his hands together. His mouth curled in a toothy smile. Before I knew it, I was done. I felt full, satisfied, and filled with a strange feeling of joy. Wow, I said. That was really good. 4 minutes and 23 seconds, he said. I nodded, only mildly creeped out by his attention to detail. As I stood up and put on my coat, the man took a step toward me. Is there anything else you need from me? I asked. The man shook his head. No, 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 he said, closing his eyes. He stretched his arms above his head and let out a long, erotic sigh. It sounded like he was having an orgasm. Oh, God, he moaned, shaking out his arms and legs. Oh, God. I laughed, awkwardly. All right, well, I should probably go, I said. The man dropped to his knees. How could it feel so? So good. I haven't felt like I'm like a kid. A baby. Oh God. The man's eyes rolled as drool dripped onto the carpet. He ran his hand through his hair, spit webbed between his fingers. He didn't even notice. A distant panic set in. It felt like opening a bad report card. I didn't feel sick, but I knew I needed to leave. An alarm was sounding deep in my body. The money, I said. I need the money. The man dropped his face into the carpet. He started to cry, but the sound wasn't quite sad, more like relief. After a moment, he reached into his back pocket and tossed a wad of cash onto the carpet. It was wrapped in rubber bands. There's 3, he mumbled. Take it all. Please. Thank you. I didn't know I could feel like... Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. The man was now rubbing his face in the carpet spit, sliding his cheek across the fabric like a cat. He moaned again. I leaned over, grabbed the money, and ran outside. As I stepped into the sunlight, I was hit by a cold wind. My stomach twisted. Sweat dripped down my forehead. I thought back to my poison hypothesis, but I knew that wasn't the case. I wasn't sick, at least not bodily. This was all happening in my brain, a Trojan horse attacking from the inside. I looked left, then right, then left again. Suddenly, I forgot where I was, where the subway station was, how I even got here. I ran my tongue across my teeth, dislodging a piece of meat. Now, it didn't taste smoky or balanced anymore. It tasted rotten. I stumbled down the steps and walked left. Or maybe it was right. I don't remember. But I only made it a few steps. Suddenly, my face hurt. I looked up. My chest was on the sidewalk. The sun had set. It was dark and freezing. What happened? I asked, my voice raspy. I pushed against the ground and somehow made it on my feet. Around me, the drug zombies were more brazen, wandering out of their hiding spots and taking to the street. They bumped into each other, swung their fists aimlessly, howled like wolves. At night, Hunting Park looked like a carnival for the insane. I looked back at the man's house, but I couldn't tell which it was anymore. I reached for my phone to check the address, but it was gone. I checked all my pockets. No phone. No wallet. No keys. No wad of cash. Hell. Help me, I whispered, but my voice was getting weaker. Each word a new challenge. I took another step forward, but my foot hit the curb. I fell forward, landing face first on someone's lawn. Pain shot from my eyes to my ears to my collarbone. Blood dripped onto my lip. Somehow, I managed to turn on my back, now staring at the smog-hidden stars. As I watched the night sky twist and turn, I became overwhelmed by a strange feeling. I closed my eyes. Then I saw it. It was a boy's face. He had freckles and curly brown hair. His eyes were open, but not quite looking at anything. His tooth was chipped. There was a line of cut flesh below his chin, running across his throat. Dark blood ran down his white t-shirt. He was young, probably no older than 6 or 7. I felt something heavy in my hands. I looked down. I was holding a shovel. The row of homes shrank in size, the flagpoles morphing to branches. I looked down. The sidewalk was gone. I was in the woods, standing over the boy's body. The trees whistled above me, the wind humming frantic, high-pitched. I couldn't stop shivering. As I looked down a second time, I realized where the boy was. The grave was too small for his body. His legs bent in different directions. Without thinking, I leaned down and scooped up a pile of dirt. I didn't want to, but I twisted my shovel over the boy, covering his face with stones and mud. It filled his open mouth. "Why'd you cry so loud?" The thought popped in my head. If you didn't cry, I wouldn't have needed to do this. I couldn't place the voice of these thoughts. They were invading me, attacking my pasture like hungry soldiers. You made me do this. The other boys didn't cry. You did this to yourself. I dug my fingernails into my scalp, hoping to reach in and stop the thoughts from coming, but they wouldn't. My reality kept slipping. I couldn't tell the city street from the woods. Then, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I whipped around. "Did you eat it?" she asked. Her voice was calm, measured. "Where am I?" "Oh no," she said, squeezing my arm. I looked around, dazed. "Hey, talk to me. How much sin did you ingest?" "A few ounces. A pound." "What was it?" I turned back, looking for a break in the trees to escape, but there was none. The forest had no exit, the trees bound together like fence posts. I turned back to the woman, still trying to catch my breath. "Just breathe," the woman said. "I need to get home," I said. "My parents, they'll call the cops, right? They'll find me." Unprompted, the woman stepped forward and hugged me. I hated it. "We didn't know what was in it," she whispered. "It's not our fault. Get off of me," I yelled, pushing her back. She stumbled for a moment, then fell back into the grave. I walked over to look, but she was gone. Only the boy remained. "Where am I?" I asked. "Please, someone, I don't like this. Please." I turned away from the grave and ran toward the tree line. When I got to one, I balled my hand into a fist and punched the bark. I needed it to move. I needed it to move. I needed to get home, to throw up, to go back to normal. Bang! 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 I knocked again, then again, then again. Still no movement. The tree remained. I was trapped. I looked back at the boy. I could see his broken fingers peek out over the grave. I knocked 3 more times. This time, a light emerged, brighter than anything I'd seen before. I looked up. A man was standing there, a baseball bat in his hands. "Please," I mumbled. "Get the fuck off my porch," he said. I could see a few kids running around behind him, playing some game with wooden swords. No, I was. I tried walking forward, but he stopped me, pushing the tip of the bat into my chest. "I'll smack that junky smile off your lips," he said. "Leave, now." I took a step back. I said again, but it was useless. My brain and body were in separate forests, the dead boy buried between them. I stumbled down to the sidewalk. I looked up. Somehow, the sun was here again. It was hot, blistering like summertime. My shirt was soaked in sweat. I walked forward. The streets of Hunting Park laid out like dead vines. I kept walking until my legs wouldn't allow it. I dropped to the ground, my elbows breaking my fall. As I tried to crawl forward, I tasted another piece of meat, still lodged in my teeth. Now, as I sucked on it, it was beyond repulsive, like eating a spoonful of feces. But it wasn't feces, or expired meat, or a pork chop. As I chewed on the material and swallowed, my heart sank. I realized what I had eaten. I never knew my mother. I didn't even know what she looked like. There wasn't a single picture in our house, and not a shred of social media evidence. Today, I would finally find out. I wiped my sweaty brow as I turned onto the highway and hit the gas. The memories of my past came flooding into my mind as the world passed by. As a kid, the only family I ever knew was my father. My father was a man of God, or so he'd like me to have believed. But why would a man of God never step foot in a church? Why would a man of God never have me baptized? And yet every night, religiously, he would sit me down before dinner and we would pray together. Our Father, who art in heaven. And then it would almost always turn to the same two things. My father, his hands clasped tightly and his eyelids squeezed shut, would beg between grinding teeth, "Please, Lord, please accept her into your arms." Sometimes a tear might fall, but he would always then look at me and watch over my boy. My father's ashamed face filled my mind as I turned off the highway and onto the little farm road. "I know I have made a mistake, Lord. Forgive me." His words echo in my ears as I pass by rows of cornfields. Where is Mom? I must have asked that question 1,000 times as I grew, but the answer eluded me. Instead of answering, he would turn to the bottle. The door to my father's bedroom was always locked, but one Saturday night he'd drunk the bottle from almost cap to bottom. Sunday morning, I found him curled up next to his bed, a cross gripped tightly in his hands. It was the first time I'd ever been in his room. It had been drowned with religious doctrine. Pages of the New Testament were even hanging from the ceiling. The pages grew more frequent as I neared a pale cabinet in the corner of the room. The memory faded from my mind briefly as I reached the spot in the tree line that had to be the entrance and parked my car on the shoulder. The cabinet was so covered in pages that I could barely see any wood at all. I pulled one page off and jumped back in surprise. The cabinet was made of white bone, and it looked ancient. I hesitantly reached for the black iron handle. A cold hand fell on my shoulder. I recoiled and found myself face to face with my father, his eyes bloodshot and crusty drool dripping from his chapped lips. "I'm sorry, I started to stammer. "That was hers," he whispered to me. "Mom," I breathed. "Don't call her that again." His words chilled my spine as I began walking the forest trail. He was never the same after that night. After the cabinet incident, my father began to scream at night. It was usually wordless, but sometimes I could make out the same two words: "Forgive me." Any attempt to comfort him was dashed, because at that point, he couldn't bear to look at me. I didn't know why. Other people had no issue looking at me. Well, except the one time I went to church. I'll never forget that. I was about 16. The second I entered, I felt unwelcome, which from what I'd been led to believe, was not supposed to be the right reaction. Eyes glanced at me quickly and then looked away. Hushed voices whispered, and I found myself in the only empty pew. I was an alien there. I left shortly after. The trail was darkening by the second. I had been walking it for hours. Still, it plunged deeper and deeper into the forest, with no sign of ending. I pulled out a flashlight and clicked it on. I was not stopping. When I was 17, my father, in a drunken panic, carried my mother's cabinet out onto the yard, drenched it in lighter fluid, and set it on fire. He broke down weeping next to it, and when the police arrived, he was inconsolable. Only one thing survived the fire: an old Polaroid photo. It was a picture of my father and what had to be my mother standing in the woods, smiling. Except nearly all of my mother had been burned out of the picture. My father's condition deteriorated. Attempts were made, but it was soon too dangerous for him to live at home, and so he was interred at a mental hospital. Years went by, and with each visit I made, he looked worse. I shook my head and shined the flashlight forward, now completely ensconced in darkness. Despite it being summer, it was freezing. I pulled a jacket out of my backpack and continued onwards. I knew I was close now. I could feel it in my bones. At 25, I got the call from the hospital. It was the end. When I arrived, my father was nearly gone. My father, his eyes shut, reached out for my face. I leaned forward and his shriveled fingers pulled me to his cracked lips so he could whisper his confession. I killed her. I moved my lips to his ear. Where is she? My father's lips trembled. He took a sputtering gasp, winced, and then he told me where she was. And then he finally looked at me. For the first time in nearly a decade, he gazed upon me with those cloudy eyes, which immediately widened in terror. You've always looked so very much like her, he whimpered. At last, I found the grave. There was no headstone, but the great pale tree above it could not be mistaken. I plunged my shovel into the earth and dug until my hands were raw. Finally, I finished. I heaved an exhausted sigh and tossed the shovel. The coffin was handmade, unnaturally wide, and covered from top to bottom in the New Testament. I touched the lid and flinched. It was searing hot. Grabbing the shovel again, I pried the lid off, opened the coffin, and shined the flashlight at the bones of my mother. She had been decapitated, and her head resting on her chest was the first thing I saw. Her teeth were like pointed knives, a whole mouth of razor-sharp canines. An icy chill snaked from the top of my spine to the bottom of my toes. I took a breath and then looked past her head at the rest of her body. The flashlight dropped from my hands, plunging me into darkness as I screamed. Wings. The bones of great spiky wings lay spread out above her shoulders. I turned heel and sprinted away blindly into the darkness of the woods. My chest burned, but I did not stop, till at last my knees buckled and I collapsed to the dirt. I squinted my eyes in the darkness, just barely able to make out the forest in the pale moonlight, and then I felt it, behind both of my shoulder blades. It was like two burning needles were piercing through my skin.